Maybe I know there is a meeting just ending, so maybe we just give people some 5 minutes.
Okay, then we'll start with 5 minutes past, or we give them 5 minutes.
That's fine.
Okay, then we'll start at 7 minutes past.
Okay.
So people can grab their favorite drink as we prepare. I think we can start now. Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar on Nairobi Disaster Risk Academy. It's a very interesting session, even though it's 1 hour, but we'll try to cover this very interesting topic. And in today's discussions, we'll examine the connection between urbanization, looking at the case of Nairobi, but also thinking conceptually in a broader sense about how to think about urbanization and disaster risk reduction. We have excellent panelists to kickstart and frame the discussion today, but also we're looking forward to some of your comments and the discussions that will follow. So given that we have an hour or less for this discussion, we have 2 main parts. And the first part is a panel discussion that will be moderated by Dr. Atela. And then once we'll have around 40 minutes or so for the panel discussion. Then afterwards, we'll open up a Q&A session where you're most welcome to share raise your questions or comments, etc. So as the discussion goes along, you're most welcome to type in your comments or questions in the chat box. Feel free to use it. And when it comes to the Q&A session, you can either post your question in the chat box or you can raise it in person. But the facilitator or moderator, Dr. Atela, will advise accordingly once we get to that session. So just a few housekeeping tips. Make sure you're on mute if you're not speaking, so that we can have very clear communication. So without much ado, I'll hand the floor over to Dr. Atela for the panel discussion.
Thank you.
Is it the only me? Is it you cannot hear Dr. Johannes?
Yeah, I think his audio is cutting off.
Just to mention that we've just finished, so that might. Hello?
Hello, I think we lost you in the first minute or so. Your audio cut off.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. I think somebody was calling me. Yeah, so I was just saying that I think a number, there are some of our panelists who are still in a meeting that has just ended. So but I can see some are already here. So that might mean that we sort of reverse the program a bit, but just to explain the context of this, and it's great that Dr. Nyango is also here, who is driving the summer school process. So this is one of the events that is coming under the auspices of the summer school under the Africa Research and Impact Network in collaboration with the STEP Center. So the summer school has been going on for the last 1 week, I think 5 days, and the focus has been about strengthening capacity and the perspectives of young researchers on the issue around methods and how to do transformative research around sustainability. So the summer school has been mainly focusing on what we call decoloniality. So decoloniality in this case means how do we sort of ensure that the voices from the developing countries are able to research leadership, but also in terms of policy leadership, but again also in terms of defining the agenda. So that has been the focus of the summer school, and we've got about 20 participants from all over the world, and these participants have been very engaging in terms of trying to understand what are the opportunities, what are the spaces through which young, talented researchers can start taking more active leadership. So one of the pathways to ensure that this happens is what we call innovative capacity building. And innovative capacity building is not just a capacity building on anything. It's just a general capacity building, but it has to be capacity building focusing on some of the most pressing challenges of the globe today. And this is why this particular discussion is very important in terms of looking at the capacity gaps when we look at disaster risks and trying to see what is it that really needs to be done, what are the gaps that needs to be filled, even as we discuss sustainable cities or sustainable societies under the Sendai framework. And because the Nairobi Risk Hub, which is part of the broader Tomorrow Cities, so Tomorrow Cities is a UKRI GCRF funded project hub working in 4 global cities: Nairobi, Kathmandu, Quito, and Istanbul. I assume you know where these are. But the idea is to really, contribute interdisciplinary evidence and support policy that would basically result into, disaster risk reduction. So the element of risk is, is very critical in this particular sense. And the idea is to basically ensure that we put in place systems, evidence, but also not just evidence, but policy relevant evidence and evidence which is relevant to the needs of the people of these particular cities that can enable them to prepare better for disasters. You know that disasters are quite becoming a major challenge to our development. And of course, if you look at Nairobi, you see things like fire, flooding, always hundreds of people dying out of due to flooding, a number of people losing properties to fire. There are many other emerging disasters within a city like Nairobi, and of course the entire key African cities, which I think are at risk to many of these particular disasters, including earthquakes and all that. And so the need to really prepare these cities better if we are to achieve sustainable development is really very critical. And this is why, looking at the future, the capacity to be able to handle or address or manage these particular disasters is very critical. And therefore, what we are trying to do today is to begin that discussion. We are trying to see an opportunity where we can open up the discussion and start thinking about, the capacities needed, what capacity building models are needed to be able to prepare, to prepare better, for some of these emerging, disasters. And in that particular case, we've seen even, pandemics such as COVID, which are basically also uncertain, coming in as also part of that particular ecosystem of disaster. So this is really a global debate, and as really developing cities like Nairobi and other African countries, this is very important that we look at this particular issue with a lot of holistic approach. So capacity to develop skills, develop research capabilities, policy capabilities, to be able to design more stronger evidence-based policies, capacity to be able to develop interdisciplinary evidence, be able to produce models that can basically show us where the risks or where we need to focus in terms of preparatory measures. So these capacities need to be put in place. But because for a long time there has not been some systematic capacity building support that really leverages on the partnerships that have been built over time, including the North-South partnership, for instance, in this particular project under the Tomorrow Cities that we are undertaking. What is it that we are going to leave to Nairobi after doing all the research and after producing all the data and publishing all the papers? So this is very critical, and this is why I am happy to welcome you to this particular discussion, and I hope we can begin to explore this area. And as I said, this is very exploratory, very broad. There is basically no, correct or wrong answer, but we are starting this conversation, which is going to give sort of room to much more broad and targeted initiatives. So with that background, I want then to go as to the panel discussion. I don't know whether Carmen is already here. I was with him in another meeting, and also Halima. They were just receiving messages. They're joining. Let me see. So, okay. I know that meeting is still perhaps going on because there was a lot of discussions. Yeah. So yeah, I'm getting so they're just winding up to be able to join. But as we then, I know some other panelists are here. Brian is here. Do we have James here? Aaron, is James here?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, James is here. Thank you very much, James. Good to have you here. So we have two of the panelists. But very quickly, as we start and get to, because I would like to have, first of all, Carmine, to open with that, for us, about this issue around risks. What does it mean? What does it entail? What are the confusions around it, so that we clearly understand what we are talking about before we sort of get into the nitty-gritties. Then let me turn back, because this is a summer school-based event, and I know the summer school participants prepared some perspectives on what they think could be innovative approaches to supporting capacity in this particular sense. So I don't know who was selected or agreed or nominated to represent some of those thoughts. So maybe we can start with that as we get our panelists to come in. So Haron, who are the representatives of the summer school participants?
Hi, Johannes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity. The representative for the summer school is Olga, and Paul, that's Paul from Nigeria. And then we have Adriana, who is with us in Nairobi. So I see Olga is here, so we can start with Olga, and then Samuel Olayutibe, and then you can have Adriana. And yeah, thanks.
So we give 3 minutes to each, so that should be around 9 minutes or so. Okay, so we start with Adriana.
We start with Olga.
Okay, we start with Olga. Thank you. Okay, where is Olga here? As Olga prepares, can we have some? Is it Samuel? No.
Yes, Samuel from Nigeria.
Okay, Samuel, some quick thoughts.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
Yeah, please, can you come again with the, I didn't get what you want me to actually do, please.
Okay, I'll give it to Haron. Haron, could you explain? Because what we agreed was that the summer school participants could provide some some perspectives in terms of what are some of the innovative capacity building models that such a an initiative could take in terms of disaster risks. If if you reflect that from the point of early career researchers who are actually the main target for this kind of initiative.
Okay, if I understand the concept, I think one of the things that has come out of our interaction in the summer school is the need for collaboration. Collaboration amongst researchers, particularly when it comes to disaster risk reduction, and then also a bottom-up approach where you always carry the recipients along. So in terms of community engagement, making sure that the people are involved, even when you're going to be offering them solutions to how to manage disaster risk, for example, they would be there with you at the table when you're coming up with concepts, when you're coming up with ideas, when you're coming up with projects, even when it comes to funding and managing funding. For example, how do you ensure that you change the mindset of the people to not to predispose themselves to disaster? Say, for example, in the area of, say, waste management, for example, what are innovative ways as to how waste can be managed? Because particularly, let me give an example of some parts of my country, Nigeria. One of the problems that they have is we have a problem with managing municipal waste. A lot of the communities believe that when it rains, for example, they can empty their bins in drains and then the rain wash it away. But what happens eventually is that this waste end up clogging the drains and the canals. And eventually what happens? There's flooding. So there needs to be this approach where the people are involved. They know the risk involved. They understand the consequences of their action. And then early researchers are given the opportunity to also hear their voices, because they are the ones that actually go out into the field to collect data, to interact with the people, to also go back to give people feedback when they've done their research. I think I'll stop there for now.
Okay, thank you. So that's key. Collaboration and making that collaboration more sustained and kind of bringing in the context in this particular collaboration, which again is linked to the decoloniality discussion that we've been having in the summer school. So thank you so much. I see we have a number of panelists already in here. So I think I'll shift back to basically begin the panel discussions. Carmine is still not here. I know there is a meeting that is Carmine here? No, I can't see him. Taking quite some time. But I can see we have already. Lima is joining shortly. I can see we already have Brian from the county government. We also have James from the Mukuru community, and also we have Dr. Edward, the head of Department Disaster Risk Management from Masinde Muliro University. So maybe just start off with Brian, just to explore this a bit further. In the context of the county government, we know that the county government, we've been working together. So I know there are a number of things we've shared, but the county government has been mandated to have the responsibility of managing disaster. Under the new constitution, the county governments have a lot of mandate and a lot of responsibility in disaster management, and you've been doing this. But at this particular time, as we start this journey, to think about a capacity building initiative that could really be helpful to the city, What are some of the challenges that you face, when dealing with disaster risks, and basically reflect a bit on the capacity gaps that you see within the City Hall of Nairobi? Brian.
Yeah, thank you very much, Johannes. Good evening to all. Yeah, one of the challenges that we have in the county government, first and foremost, is that we do not have, we have a Disaster and Emergency Management Act, but we are unable, to regularize the same so that we have some kind of a proper way of working when dealing with disaster risks. Two, most sectors, require a lot of capacity building in terms of, for example, Samuel was talking about waste management. And for instance, at the dumping site, and the garbage blocked a river, and there was a flood. So most sectors need, or all sectors require capacity building to be able to manage, disaster risks in a more organized way. Even our sector, the one that deals with disaster, we require capacity building. The Disaster and Emergency Management sector was formed in 2018. So really it's a baby that requires to be nurtured. This baby needs to grow. So generally in the county government, we need a lot of capacity building. We need a lot of collaboration with other agencies within the county and also outside the county. So that for the moment, that's what I can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. I was going to pick you up a bit to just try and be a bit, get some specific details from you. When you talk about we really need capacity building, what kinds of capacity support are you looking at to be instrumental in this case? Just briefly.
For instance, like in our sector, the disaster and emergency management sector, we need our officers trained, for example, in ways of mitigation, in ways of preparedness. We also require equipment, generally so that it can be geared towards having a clear way of working within the county government.
So that's all good. We'll come back to that, equipment and all that, but do we have skills to manage, handle the equipment, and also know when and where to deploy these equipment? So anyway, we can basically come back to that at the moment, but I would like then to go a bit to the bottom, just to understand from the community perspective. We have James Kariuki here, who is a representative of the community from Mukuru. So in the work that we do, we work quite closely with the Mukuru community and of course Kibera community. So our target is based in mainly the urban, population living in the informal settlements or low income settlements, and because they are the ones who are more prone to disaster. So one of our passion is to ensure that their voices are actually heard and well profiled. So we have James Kariuki, and James, could you please just tell us in a very exploratory way, what the communities in Mukuru basically face a lot of risk, and of course they're prone to. They've been experiencing a number of disasters that have really caused a lot of damage in the area. But thinking about that community, who they are, what they have, how they live, what kinds of support do you think they need in the context of responding to the disaster risks? Of course, we are looking at things like fire, floodings, and what do you, what does the community have? What are the things that what are the strengths that exist within the community to respond to this particular disaster risk? So, James, are you able to elaborate that?
Yes.
Okay. So the floor is yours, and if your camera can be on, it will be useful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sasa, can I speak in Swahili?
Yes, you can speak in Kiswahili, if that is easier for you. But we will, Henry is here, our rapporteur, so Henry, once James has, said in Kiswahili, you can give a quick, a quick interpretation, brief interpretation of what he has said. James.
Yes. Mwanzo ni kuuza huyu jamaa ambaye amesema ni Kisangi, ambaye ni wa disaster management. Huyu amesema wanapata floods because wale watu wanafanya dumping kwa mitoni. Kwa mfano hapa niko na Bugong River, of which kweli kabisa vile anasema wanadump pale. Factories zile ziko karibu na hiyo mtoni, zimefanya hiyo mtoni chemicals nini zile wamesafisha kwa industries, zote zimeingia ndani ya hiyo mtoni. Isitoshe kama wao wenyewe, sijui kama amesema they are not trained, I don't know wamesema namna gani, how comes wamepewa kazi ambaye wajasomea ama wajahitimu. Sababu hii mambo ya kudump ndani ya mitoni, hii ndio inafanya disasters zinakuwa.
Did we lose James, or I'm the one who is?
Yeah, I think we lost him.
So mimi ile tungeweza kusema zile shida tuko kwa ile hizi ni mioto.
Hello James, we hatukusikii vizuri James. Hello. Mtandao yako iko na shida kiasi.
Unaona sasa?
Yeah, kiasi inakuwa vizuri. So ebu ninirudia ile maneno umesema hapo awali.
Nimeuliza huyu jamaa,
yes,
kama yeye ni officer ambaye anahusiana na disasters, ukweli kabisa anafanya kazi na watu ambaye wajahitimu kufanya hizo kazi. Sababu ikiwa mtoni ndio wanafanya dumping, county government hawana watu ambao wanafanya mambo ya kuchunguza hizi mitoni na nini. Sababu kuna wakati nilisema huyu Mejambadi ateremke na mtoni ya Gongo River kutoka na juu ili aweze kuona ile uchafu inawekwa ni yakina nani wanaweka. Wale machifu niko na wao hapa area zangu wanajenga katika hizo mitoni. Sasa wameweka villages, when the rain comes, okay, hiyo watu wataenda usiku na mtoni. Kwa nini government ambaye hata kama ni county government or national government, minister like Mr. Tobiko ambaye ni wa mazingira aonekani, NEMA tujui walienda wapi? So hii sasa ama mambo ya management ya government ama city kama ya Nairobi, in fact this is a failure because it has no plan. Hata kama tumejenga hii Mukuru na mabati ovyo, lakini Nairobi haina na mipangilio. Juu mitoni inaharibiwa, drainage hizo zinawekwa vitu zina block hizo manholes. So hii kazi ni ya kila nani wanafaa kufanya. Mambo ya watu wakiungua, hakuna mtu amekufa hapo, ama mali zitaungua, hakuna hata mtu mmoja anayeonekana kama amesema yeye ni wa disaster. Blanketi imepeanwa, chakula imepewa, wale wameathirika, hatuonagi. Chifu anakuja anaandika watu, maiti iko ndio anaandika. In the following day mambo imeisha na mnao bila aliona hiyo moto ilichoma. Yangu ndio ningependa kuchangia hii mjadala, na ningependa hawa waamke, sababu wote officers of the government they are sleeping. I appreciate you people who you came now to do the
James ni kama seems to be struggling. So
because
James,
mimi ningewaomba muendelee hivyo na muje katika mzionge. Kwa hivyo tungependa watu wakuje kwa. Hello?
yes, tunakupata sasa. Tulikupoteza kidogo. Hello James, endelea.
Sasa hapo ndio tunasema tungependelea nyinyi muje sasa, mnabeba watu, mnabeba kama minister, if he will not come, we are environment, he can just said is a representative to that, then ndio tukuje kwa ground na tutembee katika hiyo mitoni na zile area watu wamejenga mpaka ndani ya maji. Kwa hivyo ndio tujue hizi mitoni zitaua watu wakati mvua itanyesha. Hivyo ndio kitu ile itakuwa inaokoa Nairobians or in our country Kenya, if there is other areas like.
Lakini James wacha niulize, hiyo iko sawa, tumesikia hiyo. Tunataka kujua nyinyi kama community, tunajua hiyo nini, hiyo usaidizi kutoka juu policy ni ya muhimu, lakini nyinyi kama community ni nini mnafanya na ni vitu gani mko nazo mnajaribu tatua, yenye mnatumia kujaribu kutatua shida yenye unaongelelea? Yes, endelea.
Nimekupata. Wakati kubomoa nyumba moja sababu tumeshikanisha hizi manyumba zetu. In fact you just nyumba na nyumba kuachana, unakuta maybe 6 inches. Na unaona hii ni mabati. Hii hapana ukuta ya mawe. Kwa hivyo hii moto ikitoka kwa ile itaingia kwa hii. So tunabomoa nyumba ya katikati, tunawaacha nyumba hiyo tumeibomoa ili tuweze kuingia na kupenya na mitungi hizi buckets kuzima ile moto. Na maji yenyewe tunachota bali, sababu hatuna na zile mifereji kama hizi fire hydrants. Hivyo kama tungekuwa na fire hydrants hizo za mifereji, tunaweza kutoa hiyo mifereji pale hivi na kuzima, sababu area zingine hata lori iwezi kaingia ile fire extinguisher lori truck haiwezi nyumba ile. So tunatumia mikono nyumba. So hatuna vitu vingine tunatumia hivyo, moto tunaizima inaisha. Kwa hivyo unakuta hata watu wameungua ndani sababu kwa vitu ya kufanya hiyo kazi. So hizo ndio vitu tungependa tusapotiwe naye kama wanaweza.
Asante sana. Henry, you want to quickly summarize? For those who don't understand Swahili.
Yes, Dr. thanks. I was able to capture a few points from James, but one of the things that you can all know that there's the aspect of technology that is so obvious. It's not able to connect with those of us who are privileged. But straight to what we are talking about in terms of the support they need, I was able to capture the issue of the need to have response support systems such as fire hydrants, and was able to elaborate how they lack adequate support system that can help them at the informal settlement. But key among those that he actually noted, I realized that he decried the need to have strong informal risk governance system, and there was sort of a disconnect between the county government and those at the community level. And that actually came from the beginning of his presentation, the disconnect between what the county government is doing and what actually is happening on the ground. I was able to note the need for analysis, because from what he was trying to explain, there's a need to have a broader analysis of risks and then sensitizing communities about what they need to do to be able to respond to the risks that they face, especially those that relate with fire and floods. Much of the issues that he raised were just causes of risks that are may not be relevant to what we are trying to address, including insensitive dumping by the county. I mean, those in the waste sector, and actually was wondering whether those actually who are in charge of waste have the proper knowledge of how to dispose waste, and that relates to whether the capacity of city officials is sufficient enough to help address some of the risks in the informal settlement. Yeah, thanks, Dr.
Yeah, I think that corroborates well with what Brian mentioned, the lack of capacity at the city hall to be able to address some of these issues. And of course, James has raised that there are a lot of things going on and the connection is not very strong. But that is also, as Brian says, is because there's need to strengthen that capacity at the city level to be able to understand what are the dynamic experiences of these communities and how they are facing these particular risks and how they, they can be sort of engaged in managing the risk. So it's a broader issue of capacity that then reproduces that gap that I think the two have spoken about. But we'll basically try to reflect on that a bit. I want to go back to, before I come to Edward, I want to go back to the concept of risk, because really also, people talking about what risk entails, disaster risk. So there has been a lot of confusions around really what does this thing called risks mean. So if we talk about we're going to build capacity to be able to manage risks, what do we mean in this particular case? There are people who think, okay, risk is maybe, of the fire or the flood and all that. So we want to hear a bit. Gemma is here to represent Caroline, who was to basically give us some overview of what risk is and what are some of the definitions, what are some of the conceptual definitions of risk and any kinds of confusions that we continue to see, and try to break it down. So Gemma, if you're able to take it up very quickly from that particular sense, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jonas. And sorry for being late. I was in another meeting. I'm just wondering if I could share my screen, because I think it would be good just to share 2 slides that we have, if that's possible.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks. So basically, the prevailing approach to risk modeling in a quantitative sense essentially surrounds this idea of exposure interacting with hazard and vulnerability. So we have some sort of hazard like a fire or flood. We then understand what's exposed to that hazard and how vulnerable it is to that hazard in order to understand the probabilistic consequences of that hazard. And then we come up with certain ways of measuring those consequences, which we can call risk metrics. So some of the limitations or maybe the misconceptions of risk modeling that exist in prevailing approaches are that we tend to focus on current exposure. So what's there today, rather than what might be there tomorrow, when actually the actions that we take today will affect more the development that's there tomorrow rather than the development that exists today, because we don't have time to implement our policies today. Another kind of simplification of current approaches to risk is a very simplified way of modeling the hazard and the vulnerability. So we tend to focus on kind of empirical statistical approaches. However, physics-based approaches, which have traditionally been prohibited by computational power, are now possible. And these will give us a better insight into the idea and the quantification of risk on the future built environment. Another important point is that we tend to focus on risk in terms of dollar losses. However, there's many more dimensions of risk that we can think of, like well-being losses, for instance, that can be a lot more important in particular contexts. And something else that tends to happen in current approaches is that we focus on, say, the risk to one building or the risk to one, say, bridge, but we don't ever account for the holistic effect of risk across buildings and bridges and road transportation networks, accounting really for the way in which people, so the social aspect of risk, interacts with the physical environment. And another really important aspect of current approaches, which is a shortcoming, is that we look at risk at one particular snapshot in time, but failing to consider, for example, that the vulnerability of an urban system will change in time, because we might have the hazard changing in time as well, and the exposure changing in time. And all of this combines into dynamic risk, which fails to be captured. And you know, I think the underpinning question that was asked for this webinar, you know, what is the idea of risk? And that stems from the fact that most approaches to quantifying risk at the moment are black box. We don't understand how the calculations work. And that's something that we really want to open up in tomorrow's cities. So if I just move on to our approach, then it is really that we want to not just have this engine of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, but and focus in particular on physical or asset losses. But we also want to account for that social effect of risk through understanding how people interact with the physical and built environments. And a second strategic important part of our risk concept is the idea of having decision fora. So talking directly to stakeholders on what types of risk affect them, how important are different risks to them, and then we can go back and refine our calculations in an iterative approach to see exactly what type of risk metrics and to quantify the exact type of risk metrics that people who are going to be affected by the risk are actually interested in. And, you know, as a central theme of our risk concept is the idea of focusing on future risk. So we can really design our future urban system to mitigate risk on the future. And that's these urban projects input at the top of the risk concept shown on the left-hand side, which is our approach. So what we can do is we can design sort of different visions of the future and choose the vision that minimizes the risk, ensuring we have risk-sensitive planning for the future. So if you, I'm not sure, Jonas, if you have publicized our risk concept editorial note in the International Journal of Disaster Risk Reduction, but I'm happy to share a link with that on that note in the chat if that's helpful. So yeah, so that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, it seems Johannes has dropped out, if I'm not wrong, and probably I can hand over to Kennedy Bever to take over. or Victoria to hold on because I see Johannes has dropped out.
Thanks, Aaron. I think at this point in time, because we have around 10 minutes or so to go in the session, we can open the floor for questions. So does anyone want to ask any questions or make a quick comment? You can use the raising your hand function on Zoom, or you can just sort of unmute yourself and ask the question. Anyone? We have some comments in the chat. There's one from Abraham. Abraham, would you like to raise that comment? Hello?
Yeah, so sorry, Kennedy, my network jumped off in the wee hours of Gemma's presentation. That hopefully I haven't missed a lot. So where are we?
I think we're just opening up Q&A.
We have, I think we have some one or more panelists who have. We have Edward here. I don't know whether we can give him some. I'll be happy to give him some minutes to also give some reflections. But just to reflect on what Gemma said, Kennedy, if you allow me, I think it's very critical to see how the concept of risk is feeding into this. That risk is not just the fact that you see the fire happening or sort of burning properties or buildings or floods happening, but it's a question of what is the damage that we expect from this particular sort of hazard. So fire, floods remain like hazards, but then the risk they posit means that what damage can they create or produce when they occur. The other thing I think Gemma has strengthened is that risk is futuristic. So it's about what could happen if a disaster or occurs. What could be the level of damage? So that is why risk is very critical in terms of helping to plan, for the future. And this is why capacity building on risk is very important, so that those kinds of plannings can be done. But I want to bring in Edward, who has been leading one of the major university departments on disaster risk reduction at Masinde Muliro University. And I think the question we had for you, Edward, was, what are some of the approaches or some of the skills that you see are really required in terms of addressing this issue around risks, and what is the role of the universities? What do we have within the universities in the context of capacity building in relation to risk? Edward, in maybe a few 3 minutes.
Yeah. Sorry, maybe the background is not so good. My name is Edward Mugalavai from Masinde Muliro University of Science and Technology. I head a department of disaster management and sustainable development. Well, to just give a few insights on the question that I was to address, I think the main goal of disaster management is to provide experts with the skills, knowledge, and attitudes that can help them be able to work with different organizations, including the private sector, public institutions, and research organizations for that matter. And actually the focal areas and functions of disaster management include areas like disaster mitigation, environmental management, sustainable growth and development, climate change, which is multi-sectoral. It has a multi-sectoral influence. There is a disaster risk reduction aspects in general, emergency management, humanitarian assistance, peace building and conflict resolution, and disaster preparedness, just among other focal areas. You can see all these areas are actually multidisciplinary. We cannot have disaster experts who are specialized in one field and are able to handle all disasters. So it requires a multidisciplinary approach. And actually at the university where I teach, we have taken that approach, and we have under disaster management, different departments handling different areas of disaster management. For example, the one I had is disaster, specifically handling disaster mitigation. Then there is one for disaster preparedness. Then there is another one for emergency management. And then there is one for peace and conflict resolution, because we need specialists from all those fields to be able to manage disasters. So which are the areas, where are the skills needs? In which areas do we require to do capacity building? Now, as far as disasters are concerned, I'll highlight a few areas like the area of solid and liquid waste management, where we need to train experts in handling both solid and liquid waste, for that matter. Then there is the aspect of vulnerability mapping and monitoring, where we involve the geographical information systems. And as I highlighted earlier, the department dealing with preparedness is able to handle these geographical information systems and train people in how to prepare these maps and so on. Then there is the aspect of prediction and forecasting of future disasters. I think the previous speaker has mentioned something on models, on how you can even model vulnerability so that you can know the situation in the future for purposes of planning. Then there is the aspect of fire management, fire risk management, and of course, urban planning in general, because the risks we are facing are mainly or mostly because we are still poor in our planning. Yeah, we did not project whatever is happening now, and that is why we didn't put mitigation measures in place. So another thing that still, of course, needs capacity building is the area of guidance and counseling. Because when we have these disasters, we have people who require some guidance and counseling so that they can at least come back to their normal lives. And then maybe to sum it all, what is the role of the university in all this? Of course, universities are known to be centers where experts are trained. And then universities are also known for issues to do with research in all fields. And then there is the aspect of community outreach. to ensure that we create awareness out there on expected risks and how they can be handled, and so on. Universities are also involved in activities like, for example, cleanup exercises to be able to sensitize people about cleanliness of the environment, for that matter. So the university, as put it, is majorly for training of these experts, research, and this community outreach. And as I've indicated, in our university, we have taken an approach where we handle disasters as a multidisciplinary field, so that everybody else is on board. You'll find hydrologists, we have anthropologists, we have geographers, we have environmentalists. All those fields are involved in disaster management training. So I think for now, that is what I intended to share. But in case there is a query, then we can look at that.
Thank you, Daktari. Very important. I think the key takeaway there is that disaster risk training should take a multidisciplinary approach. And I think that's the message that is coming out strongly in this particular process. And we already have some sense of how the university, like Masinde Muliro, and of course the other universities also looking at this, looking at the different disciplines that makes a disaster risk ecosystem. The big question is, how can all this come together in a way that basically informs plans and not just plans, but also action. So these are the skills, so the capabilities that we need to start thinking about building, and this is really very critical for the Nairobi Risk Hub in terms of supporting that process. Henry, do we have any questions on the chat that might need a response? I lost my chat history.
There's a comment from Atela. Maybe she could speak about it in a more summarized way, because it's a long comment. Maybe she can say something on it.
Okay.
I think Atela is no longer in the meeting, but
Okay.
I'll share the comment with you, Jonas.
Okay, so this is a comment, not a question. Yeah, but if I remember some other comments earlier, which was basically saying there is, both communities and policymakers would need to understand what risk is all about. If there was some comment like that, which I think was made by somebody, but that's fine. But this is a comment like communities and stakeholders in disaster risk reduction from Abraham fields needs to understand what risk is facing. Yeah, this is the one I'm talking about, and which risk is facing the community, and conduct vulnerability analysis to identify community needs and who is more exposed to the hazard within their communities. So that is very important. I think the point is we know what needs to be done, but now how to do it, the skills to be able to do it remains a major area that we are basically plunging this discussion. So Alima has just joined, and we are actually trying to sum up because time is up. But Alima, do you want to take some 2 to 3 minutes just to quickly provide some perspective around the advocacy and research capacity gaps from the Red Cross perspective? So Halima is the director of research at the Kenya Red Cross. Halima, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My sincere apologies, Johannes. If you can see from my background, I was actually participating.
we are all in this. We just manage it. We jump from one to the other.
Yeah, and I was a keynote speaker, so I had to wait for my questions to be able to respond before I leave. So I sincerely apologize for that, but we are very together in terms of this particular initiative. we are quite actually excited about this Risk Academy. I want to see how it's going to unpack. But I think if I just take a minute or two in terms of the advocacy gaps regarding this particular work that we are engaging in is, of course, advocacy first, it's a very expensive initiative. I think what people don't get to know is when you try to advocate for something, you're trying to actually create a change of mindset. So that's what we want to instill, a change of mindset. So I usually use this as example of many years ago. I know it doesn't happen these days. It's like courting a girl to be your wife, the process that you go through and the challenges that you have to go through with your in-laws before actually you make that particular girl wife. So it's a lot of relationship building. And I think the gaps that we have is first, we give it a very short time. We expect within a 1 year lifetime of a project or 2 years or whatever we want to advocate for has been taken up and has been implemented in the manner that we want. So first, we need to actually be aware that it takes a bit of time. But more importantly, we need to have evidence-based advocating. We need to advocate based on something that people can actually trust, people can actually believe in. We can showcase why we are pushing for a particular agenda. Right now, we are pushing for example, to issues around understanding and knowing who and what is at risk is very important. However, the decision makers might not see that because their way of doing business is differently. Maybe they have to react to something. They don't want to be proactive. So it's actually critical that we try to ensure that we're actually pushing for evidence-driven advocacy around many aspects. The other thing I think, Johannes, is we think advocacy is just for some specific people who advocate. I think we are all have the ability to advocate for something. And it's important when people who believe in that particular aspect are the ones who are advocating. So for lack of a better word is what we now call influencers. I think we all have the capacity to be influencers. We just have to believe in ourselves, and in our own different levels, we have to engage in advocacy to be able to change the mindset and to ensure that if it's policy adoption, then that happens. So it is important that advocacy activities or initiative comes from the people who believe that that particular issue needs to happen or it needs to be adopted. So that is what I can share for now, Johannes, but I'm happy to clarify further or take any action since I've joined late, so I've missed the gist of what was going on.
Yeah, that's fine, Alima. Great comments. Evidence-based advocacy, evidence-based. Yeah, so this is why research is very important, even as we link that to the capacity and building champions in some of these areas. So thank you very much. I think we will basically continue this discussion because it's a continuous. This is just the beginning of testing, in a very exploratory way. And because time has really exceeded our limits, so I want to hand it back to Kennedy, who was chairing the webinar, to take us to the next steps. Thank you very much. And let me just take this opportunity before I hand it back to Kennedy to thank all our panelists who have basically given us some really a good starting point, fundamental in terms of moving forward this particular process, a step in the right direction indeed. Kennedy, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'll reiterate Johannes' gratitude to the panelists. Thanks for making your time as well as enriching the conversation. And for those who also shared some of their comments or views in the chat. At this point in time, as we wrap up, I'd like to invite Henry. And Henry, you have 3 minutes to summarize the discussions for us, for everyone's benefit, and from that we'll close. So 3 minutes, Henry.
Thanks, Kennedy. We'll just take a quick look at what we have captured from the discussion. And it started from the need to have innovative approaches to capacity building in the context of risk, especially in the urban settings. And that actually brought out the need to have a more sustained collaboration, not only among researchers, but also including communities. So they need to have a more inclusive approach to partnership that actually also has the element of bottom up, which was also brought up, and also the need to look at risk in a more new approach looking at the risk predispositions, what do we know about risk and how do we actually deal with those misconceptions? And actually from the point, I was able to capture presentation from Chimema, if I got the name right, Chema.
Yeah, that's right.
What I liked about what actually came out from his presentation was the need to have a forward-looking approach to risk, and that actually tried to challenge the empirical models that we use and focus towards a participatory approaches that also looks at scenario building, scenario planning with the community. That was the key message from your presentation. And they need to have interdisciplinary evidence around risk management that actually is backed up by evidence from different quarters, especially fusing both those in the academia and communities. And looking at some of the roles or some of the ways that academia can actually play in actually reinforcing the risk conversation. Dr. Mgwala actually talked about the need to build up capacity, not only among those in the academia, but also extend the same to community members. And what needs to come out, or what actually came out, is they need to look at the risk approach, not only from the disaster approach, but also to look at how to respond to risk and not to respond to the disaster itself. And concluding with what we are getting from Halima, advocacy gaps, it is a mind shift, and it is a process that does not actually happen once. It's something that takes time, and we all are called upon to have the influencing role to play in actually building evidence-based advocacy in risk approach. Yeah, thanks, Kennedy.
Thanks a lot, Henry, for that succinct summary. And as we could see, there's a lot that is going on in disaster risk reduction and urbanization, that space, but there's also more that can be done. And just to share, there are many initiatives that are in the pipeline in terms of building the capacity of the various actors, but also generating knowledge and insights on the same. So as we conclude, this has been a very informative session. And to capture some of those insights, we'll have a blog and a highlight of the discussions that will be prepared and shared shortly by everyone else. So once more, thank you to our distinguished panelists. Thank you to Johannes for the innovative facilitation. And thank you to Henry for taking notes, but also sharing the summary. So thanks everyone for your time, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.